Picture your neighbor. He just pulled up in a brand new $80,000 SUV, wearing a watch that costs more than your first car. He looks like he's winning the ultimate game. But what you don't see is him sitting at his kitchen table at 2 in the morning, staring at his phone, feeling a tight, suffocating knot in his chest because he's exactly 2 missed paychecks away from total ruin. Meanwhile, the guy quietly walking his dog in faded sweatpants down the street, he could buy that SUV in cash tomorrow. And that's exactly why he never will. You see, society has sold us a very specific, very toxic lie about what success is supposed to look like. We have been conditioned since childhood to believe that as your income goes up, your visible footprint in the world is supposed to expand right alongside it. You get the promotion. You upgrade the apartment. You land the big client. You lease the luxury car. You hit 6 figures. You suddenly feel this invisible obligation to wear clothes with names you couldn't pronounce 5 years ago. On the surface, this makes sense. But in reality, this is the exact mechanism that keeps incredibly smart, high-earning people dead broke. But here's where it gets interesting. The people who are actually building generational wealth, the ones who sleep 8 hours a night and never check their bank balance with a racing heart, are playing a completely different game. They have realized that the most dangerous thing you can do for your financial future is to let anyone know you have a future at all. They practice the art of financial invisibility. And if you are sitting there right now, making decent money, but feeling like it's evaporating through your fingers, feeling a low-grade panic about the next 10 years of your life, it is probably because you are managing your image instead of managing your wealth. Let me tell you about 2 guys I've watched navigate this exact scenario. We'll call them David and Marcus. They both work in the same city, both make around $140,000 a year, and both hit that income level at roughly the same age. But their lives are on completely different trajectories. And it all started with a single decision they made the day they got their first massive raise. When David saw that new number on his paycheck, his brain immediately translated it into purchasing power. He felt he had finally arrived, and he wanted the world to know it. He moved into a zip code that stretched his budget just enough to make him sweat at the end of the month. He bought the car that made the valets nod at him. He started picking up the tab at dinners, posting photos from boutique hotels, and leaning into the identity of the successful guy. And this is the part that should worry you, because David didn't think he was being reckless. He thought he was just living commensurate with his new status. He thought he was doing what you are supposed to do when you work hard and succeed. What almost nobody realizes is that when you make your wealth visible, you instantly trigger something I call the expectation tax. The moment your friends, your family, and your colleagues perceive you as wealthy, the rules of engagement change. The dinners you get invited to suddenly cost 3 times as much. Relatives start coming out of the woodwork with passive-aggressive comments about how nice it must be to have your kind of money, followed closely by requests for bridge loans they will never repay. You find yourself trapped in a relentless cycle of performance, funding a lifestyle that belongs to a character you are playing rather than the person you actually are. And Marcus didn't realize this until he watched it happen to people all around him. So when Marcus got his raise, he did something incredibly unnatural. He did absolutely nothing. He drove the same reliable, slightly boring, 5-year-old sedan back to the same modest, slightly outdated apartment. He didn't pop champagne. He didn't post a cryptic, inspirational quote on social media about the grind paying off. He absorbed the financial victory in total. Absolute silence. But that's not even the real problem with visible wealth. The real problem is what it does to your cognitive bandwidth. Every time you buy a status symbol, you are not just spending money. You are buying anxiety. You are buying the stress of scratching the rims on that car, the stress of maintaining that massive house, the stress of ensuring your next vacation looks as good as your last one. Your brain becomes a supercomputer dedicated solely to the defense of your lifestyle. To escape this, Marcus systematically began to erase his financial footprint. He didn't just decide to be frugal. He engineered his life so that nobody could even guess his net worth. The very first thing he did was build a firewall between his income and his checking account. The moment his paycheck hit, a massive percentage of it was automatically routed to a completely separate bank. Not just a separate account, a different institution entirely. One where he didn't even keep the app on his phone. When he looked at his primary checking account, It looked like he was making $60,000 a year. He engineered a state of artificial scarcity, forcing his brain to operate as if the raise had never happened. And this is where most people get it wrong. They think living like this is a form of self-deprivation. They think Marcus is punishing himself. But if you could look inside his mind, you wouldn't see deprivation. You would see profound, unshakable relief. Because by keeping his money invisible, he was buying his own freedom from the opinions of others. He took it a step further with how he presented himself physically. If you looked at his closet, you wouldn't find a single logo. No luxury belts, no designer sneakers screaming for attention. He bought high-quality clothes that fit perfectly, but they were entirely unidentifiable. To the trained eye of another stealth wealth practitioner, he looked put together. To the average person obsessed with brands, he was entirely forgettable. He became a ghost in the social hierarchy. He realized that the clothes you wear to prove you have money are the exact clothes that drain the money you are trying to prove you have. But here's where it gets really fascinating, especially when it comes to social dynamics. You would think the hardest part of building wealth in secret is not spending the money, but it's actually navigating the people who want you to spend it. Marcus developed a highly specific script for this. When coworkers suggested moving happy hour from the local pub to a high-end rooftop lounge, he didn't say, "I can't afford that," because that invites pity or questions. Instead, he simply smiled and said, "That doesn't really fit into my financial system right now, but I'll catch up with you guys next time." He externalized the blame. It wasn't that he was broke, and it wasn't that he was cheap. It was just the system. And because he delivered it with complete calm, without an ounce of insecurity, people respected it and moved on. He stopped apologizing for his boundaries. And this is the part that should really make you stop and think about your own life. How many times have you swiped your card for something you didn't even want, just to avoid a slightly uncomfortable 5-second conversation? How much of your future freedom have you traded away just to avoid looking like the odd man out at a dinner table? To protect himself from this, Marcus mastered the art of being incredibly vague. When people at parties asked him what he did for a living, a question usually designed to silently calculate your net worth, he didn't puff up his chest and list his impressive title or the prestige of his firm. He gave the most boring, conversation-killing answer possible. "I do some back-end logistics work," he would say, taking a sip of his drink. Nobody ever asked a follow-up question. He successfully deflected the social expectation tax by becoming profoundly uninteresting to people who measure human value by income. Meanwhile, David was drowning in exactly that kind of attention. He loved telling people he was a senior director. He loved the wide-eyed look they gave him. But that admiration was a drug, and the tolerance was building. He needed bigger trips, nicer watches, and more exclusive reservations, just to get the same hit of social validation. His entire life became a beautifully curated museum of his own financial stress. What almost nobody realizes is that social media is the ultimate accelerant for this trap. It is a machine designed to make you feel perpetually behind, practically begging you to trade your actual wealth for the illusion of it. Marcus understood this deeply. You could scour his social media profiles and you would find absolutely nothing indicating his financial trajectory. He didn't post photos from the first-class lounge. If he took a nice vacation, he didn't broadcast it in real time. He shared pictures of his dog, a good book he was reading, or a hike with friends. He intentionally lowered his social anchor, curating a digital presence that screamed average. He knew that the moment you post a victory, you invite a ledger. People start keeping track of what you owe them, what you should be doing, and how much you must have. And this is where everything starts to break for the high earner who isn't paying attention. You hit your late 30s or early 40s. You are making more money than you ever dreamed of when you were 25. On paper, you are in the top tier of earners. But your reality is a daily grind of moving money from one account to another just to cover the structural bloat of your life. The mortgage takes a massive bite. The car payments are non-negotiable. The private school tuition, the country club dues, the premium insurance policies. You are running on a treadmill that keeps speeding up, and your legs are getting incredibly tired. You are wealthy on paper, but you are broke in reality, operating with the exact same financial anxiety as someone making minimum wage. just with zeros attached to the panic. Marcus watched David hit this wall. It happened during a casual conversation about the future. David confessed, looking exhausted and older than his years, that he felt trapped. He said he couldn't take a risk, couldn't start the business he had always dreamed of, couldn't even take a sabbatical to rest, because his lifestyle required his massive salary every single month, just to keep the lights on and the illusion intact. He had built a beautiful, velvet-lined prison. But that's not even the most tragic part. The real tragedy is the future regret that is barreling toward people living like David. Imagine waking up at 55 years old, looking around at a house full of expensive objects you barely notice anymore, realizing that you traded the prime decades of your life to impress people who ultimately do not care about you. You realize that you worked incredibly hard, not to buy your own freedom, but to buy a seat at a table that only demands more of you. Marcus, on the other hand, was quietly building an impenetrable fortress. Because he kept his primary residence modest, his housing costs were a fraction of his income. Because he drove a car he owned outright, he had no monthly automotive bleeding. He took the massive surplus of cash he was generating every month, and he bought assets. Not liabilities dressed up as assets, but quiet, invisible, income-producing machines. Index funds, a small rental property managed by a third party, municipal bonds. He never talked about his investments. When coworkers gathered around the water cooler, bragging about their crypto gains or the hot tech stock they just bought, Marcus just listened and nodded. He never offered his own portfolio size. He never tried to prove he was the smartest guy in the room. He let them have the applause because he was too busy enjoying the quiet hum of compound interest working in the dark. And here is a subtle, almost invisible shift that happens when you start living this way. You completely lose the urge to complain about money. When you are broke but trying to look rich, you constantly complain about inflation, the cost of gas, or how expensive dinner was, as a way to bond with others and mask your own anxiety. Marcus stopped complaining. He maintained a neutral, completely unbothered financial profile. If prices went up, he just quietly absorbed it, or adjusted his behavior without a dramatic monologue. His silence on money matters became his ultimate camouflage. Even when it came to being generous, he did it like a ghost. When a friend hit a rough patch and needed help covering a medical bill, Marcus didn't swoop in like a savior to claim the glory. He quietly arranged an anonymous payment through the hospital's billing department. He didn't want the gratitude, and more importantly, he didn't want to change the dynamic of the friendship by exposing his capacity. He wanted the problem solved without the spotlight shifting to him. What almost nobody realizes is the profound psychological shift that occurs when you know you can buy anything, but you choose to buy nothing. It is a feeling of absolute power. When you walk into a luxury dealership in a faded t-shirt, knowing with absolute certainty that you could write a check for the most expensive car on the floor, the desire to actually buy it completely vanishes. The urge to consume is almost always rooted in a need to prove something. When you have the cash sitting in an account that nobody knows about, the proof is already there. You have validated yourself, and the need for external validation simply evaporates. This is the part that should really sink in. We are terrified of looking like we are falling behind. We are terrified that if we don't buy the house in the right neighborhood, our peers will pity us. But if you can survive the initial discomfort of not playing the status game, if you can endure a few confused looks from people who wonder why you aren't upgrading your life, you will cross over into a state of financial invincibility. You will reach a point where your passive income exceeds your artificially lowered living expenses. And when that day comes, the entire world changes. You don't walk into work with a knot in your stomach, afraid of your boss, because you know you are only there by choice. You don't lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what happens if the economy turns, because you have built a buffer so deep and so quiet that no recession can touch your daily life. David is still out there, posting his highlight reel, leasing a newer car every 3 years, and trying to outrun the exhaustion in his bones. He is terrified of the future, hoping that somehow the next promotion will finally be the one that gives him room to breathe. But it won't, because his rules of engagement dictate that the new money must be spent on new proof. Marcus is out there too. You probably stood behind him in line at the grocery store today. You didn't notice him. You didn't look twice at his shoes or his watch. He paid for his coffee, smiled at the cashier, and walked out to his old car. But as he drove away, he wasn't thinking about his mortgage or his car payment. He was thinking about the 6-month trip he is planning to take next year, entirely on his own terms, without having to ask a single human being for permission. The choice isn't between being poor and being rich. The choice is between looking rich to strangers or actually being free in the dark. You can have the applause or you can have the peace, but you cannot have both. And the longer you wait to decide which one you actually want, the more the decision is being made for you. Look at your own life right now. Look at the things you are paying for every single month. Are they buying your freedom or are they just buying your disguise? Because one day, the performance has to end, and you are going to be left alone with the reality of what you actually built.